Iran has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Not a diplomatic red line, not a warning shot, not a strategic miscalculation. What Tehran did in the span of just 96 hours was an act so brazen, so deliberately calculated to humiliate, that three of the most powerful military forces on Earth are now silently, methodically moving into position. And what you are about to learn is that the army now preparing to cross Iran's border is not the one Tehran was watching, the one they feared, the one they prepared for. No, the force assembling right now is something far more dangerous. We will get to that. But first, you need to understand exactly what Iran did, because without that, none of what follows makes any sense. It began in the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow ribbon of water, just 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point, through which 21 million barrels of oil pass every single day. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy did not fire a warning shot. They did not issue a 48-hour ultimatum. On the morning of March 3rd, IRGC fast boats, armed with C-802 anti-ship missiles, surrounded and boarded a Panamanian-flagged oil tanker carrying cargo bound for a U.S. ally. The crew, 24 sailors, including 2 American contractors, were taken below deck. The ship was redirected toward Bandar Abbas, and then silence. Tehran said nothing publicly for 11 hours. Put yourself in the position of a Pentagon war planner in that moment. You have 24 personnel, including 2 Americans, being held on an Iranian-controlled vessel. You have a carrier strike group, the USS Harry S. Truman and its battle group, operating 340 nautical miles away in the Arabian Sea. You have a commander-in-chief who has already drawn a public red line around the safety of American citizens abroad. And you have an Iranian supreme leader who just watched the United States blink twice in the past 18 months. That is the calculation Tehran made, that America would blink again. That was the unforgivable miscalculation, because this time, the response was not a strongly worded statement from the State Department. This time, it was not a UN Security Council emergency session. Within 6 hours of confirmed American captivity, the USS Harry S. Truman Battle Group reversed course and began closing the distance to the Strait of Hormuz at flank speed 31 knots. The USS Georgia, an Ohio-class guided missile submarine carrying 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles, surfaced publicly off the coast of Oman. That surfacing was not accidental. Submarines do not surface publicly by accident. That was a message, delivered in the language Iran understands. Steel, range, resolve. But here is the detail that changes everything. And you will not hear this on the evening news. Not yet. The force that is now moving toward Iran's border is not American, not primarily. The army that has spent the last 72 hours quietly repositioning armor, artillery, and airborne units along Iran's northwestern frontier is Israel's, not in the south, where everyone was watching, the north, and they're not moving alone. To understand why Israel's northern force changes every calculation, you need to understand what Iran did beyond the tanker seizure, because the tanker was a trigger, but it was not the unforgivable act. The unforgivable act happened 19 hours later, at 2:14 in the morning local time, when 2 Iranian Shahed 238 jet-powered kamikaze drones, the upgraded variant, capable of 350 kilometers per hour, struck the perimeter fence and vehicle depot of the Israeli Air Force's Nevatim Air Base in the Negev Desert. Nevatim, the base that houses Israel's entire fleet of F-35 Iodir stealth fighters. 14 aircraft were in open maintenance bays. The drones were targeting the aircraft. They missed by 23 meters, and 3 Israeli Air Force ground crew personnel were wounded. Israel has fought 7 wars since 1948. It has absorbed suicide bombings, Scud missiles, Hezbollah rockets, over 4,000 of them in 2006 alone. It has never, not once, responded to a direct military strike on a sovereign Israeli Air Force installation with restraint. Not once in 76 years. So when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened an emergency session of the Security Cabinet at 4 a.m. on March 4th, the question was not whether Israel would respond. The only question that mattered, was how large. And what you are about to see is the answer beginning to take shape on satellite imagery that analysts in Washington, London, and Riyadh were studying with cold, focused attention. The 98th Division, Israel's elite reserve armor formation, began receiving mobilization orders within hours of that Security Cabinet session. The 162nd Armored Division, already partially activated along the Gaza perimeter, began reorienting its logistics tail northward. The Israeli Air Force placed all 36 of its operational F-35 Ayadir aircraft on standby alert. Engines cold, pilots on 15-minute recall. And then came the move that no one in Tehran had modeled. The move that signals not a retaliatory strike, but a campaign. Israel's 89th Commando Brigade, the Deep Penetration Special Operations Unit responsible for the 2007 destruction of Syria's nuclear reactor, was quietly transferred by night convoy to a forward staging base in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights, which shares a border with Syria, which shares a border with Iran's most critical overland supply corridor to Hezbollah. Now understand what that positioning means strategically. Iran's entire deterrence architecture in the Levant depends on one thing: the uninterrupted flow of weapons, fighters, and funding from Tehran, through Iraq, through Syria, to Hezbollah in Lebanon. That corridor is Iran's strategic spine. It is how they project power beyond their borders without firing a single Iranian missile from Iranian soil. Remove that corridor, and Iran becomes a regional bully with no reach. A fortified island of ideology, surrounded by enemies it can no longer threaten. And the 89th Commando Brigade, now sitting in the Golan Heights, is positioned precisely to sever that spine, not to raid it, not to bomb it, to sever it permanently. The economic consequences of what is unfolding are already being felt in ways that directly affect every American watching this. Oil prices crossed $91 per barrel on the London Brent crude market on March 5th, the highest since the post-pandemic supply shock of 2022. Lloyd's of London announced that war risk insurance premiums for tanker passage through the Strait of Hormuz had increased by 340% in 48 hours. Qatar, which supplies approximately 12% of the world's liquefied natural gas, activated emergency protocols at the Ras Laffan industrial city. Container shipping lines, including Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, issued navigational advisories rerouting vessels away from the Persian Gulf entirely, adding 9 to 14 days to voyage times through Cape of Good Hope when ships take longer to arrive. Shelves take longer to restock. When oil rises $15 per barrel, every American fills up their tank and feels it. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz does not stay in the Strait of Hormuz. And yet, Washington's response has been something that veterans of the Reagan, Bush, and Clinton administrations describe as unlike anything in recent memory. Not chaotic, not reactive, deliberate, surgical, almost patient. The State Department issued a single 2-paragraph statement condemning the tanker seizure. The Pentagon confirmed the movement of the USS Georgia, but offered no further details. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz briefed key members of the Senate Armed Services Committee in a closed session that lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. 3 hours and 40 minutes for a briefing about a tanker seizure. That is not a briefing about a tanker. That is a briefing about a plan. Military analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, whose assessments have proven accurate more than 80% of the time across both the Ukraine and Middle East conflicts, released a brief on March 5th noting what they call coordinated pre-positioning behavior consistent with preparation for a large-scale combined arms operation rather than a retaliatory strike. Those are careful words, chosen precisely. A retaliatory strike lasts hours. A large-scale combined arms operation lasts weeks, and it changes borders. It changes governments. It changes the regional order. That is what 3 governments are now quietly preparing. Not a punishment, a transformation. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei made a public statement on the afternoon of March 5th, broadcast on state television, in which he described the tanker seizure as a legitimate defensive measure and warned that any military response would be met with fire across the entire region. He invoked the names of Iran's proxy forces in Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. He referenced Iran's ballistic missile stockpile, which intelligence assessments estimated between 2,000 and 3,000 operational warheads. He projected absolute confidence. He projected invincibility. And here is what is deeply, historically significant about that performance. Every single adversary that has stood in front of camera projecting that exact confidence in the 72 hours before a major military operation was launched against them has been wrong. Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, the commanders of the Argentine junta in 1982. Confidence in the hours before the storm is not strength. It is the last performance of man who no longer controls the timeline, because the timeline is no longer Iran's. The 24 American and Allied personnel aboard that tanker are the clock. Every hour they remain in Iranian custody is another hour of political justification for what comes next. Every hour Tehran delays their release is another hour of military positioning that Iran cannot undo. The 89th Commando Brigade does not undeploy from the Golan Heights. The USS Georgia does not submerge back into strategic ambiguity. The 98th Division does not stand down its reserve mobilization. These are not signals anymore. These are facts on the ground. And facts on the ground are the only language that has ever changed Iranian behavior. History will remember this moment, not as the beginning of another Middle East crisis. There have been too many of those. History will remember this as the moment Iran made the one miscalculation its entire strategic doctrine was built to avoid. It forced a response, not from one adversary, but from three simultaneously. It gave America a legal and moral justification it had been denied for years. It gave Israel a military trigger it had been waiting for since October 7th. And it gave the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, a reason to quietly open their airspace, their ports, and their intelligence networks to a coalition operation. Iran crossed an unforgivable line, and the army, now assembling, patient, silent, and certain, is about to cross one too. So what do you believe comes next? Does Iran release the captives and attempt to de-escalate? Or has Tehran already passed the point of no return? Tell us your assessment in the comments below. And if this kind of deep, serious geopolitical analysis is what you came here for, make sure you subscribe, because what happens in the next 72 hours will be covered here before anywhere else. Thank you for watching.